Alright, we're going to do a Autococker disassembly video. We're going to go over how to basically disassemble an entire autococker, and as well as some basic terminology that you might need to know about autocockers. So we'll get started here using 1/8 inch Allen key. I'm going to take off the beaver tail. The beaver tail is right here. It is there for two reasons. One, so you don't hit yourself in the face whenever the back block comes back, and two, so you cannot thumb the autococker. Thumbing the autococker was a big issue because you can increase your velocity by just, whenever the cocker rod is back, put your thumb on it and shoot, making the cocker rod hit the valve harder. Alright, so I'll go ahead and take the rest of the macro line off. Let's see, we'll do the bottom line ASA. Now this is a check it cage ASA. They're pretty common. They're definitely not my favorite ASA. In fact, I'd probably say that they're my least favorite ASA, just they're impossible to turn on and off. But they don't require a rail because they have this cage system, so that's kind of nice. Just loosen it all the way up. It should just come right out. We'll take the macro line fitting off. See, the ASA itself just comes right out, and you have two screws in here. They're going to be 5/32 screws. Not sure if I can get to them like this. I got some paint shells still in there. So to get a little more torque on them, I'm just going to go ahead and add a wrench to it. There we go. First one, that one's going to need a little more as well. Alright, so there you go. And most autocockers are going to have an ASA that uses a rail or some kind of bolts to bolt on the bottom of the frame. I know the carnivores and some other of the electronic frames bolt in from the bottom, from inside the grip frame. So, let's take the reg. This is your high pressure regulator. You have a high pressure and a low pressure regulator, just like on most guns. This just simply screws right off. This is your vertical ASA, and to get that off, you'll need a wrench, socket. You don't always need an extender, but depending on your socket, you might need one. This is a 1/4 inch 12-point socket. That should just twist right off. There we go. Okay, now we have that clear. It's not going to come off yet because of the timing rod. So to finish that off, we'll take the grip frame apart. Again, using your 1/8 inch Allen key, and you have two screws on the back of the grip frame. One right here in the front. It's partially covered up by the trigger. Some frames have a porthole to where you can get to it through the trigger guard, but not all frames have that. Those are just 10/32 threaded screws. Again, this gun hasn't been taken apart in quite a while, so some of the screws are a bit rusty. Alright, see, it's nice and dirty in there. I'm trying to be real careful not to bend this timing rod, but it's definitely stuck in there. Go ahead and get my pliers out. Okay, there we go. And we've got the trigger frame. I'll go ahead and set the body aside, and we'll focus on taking the frame apart. Let's see. This is going to use Phillips screwdriver heads. Some autocockers use a hinge frame, some use a slider frame, others use an electronic frame. It just depends on the style and preference. Basically, there's not really any advantage over hinge or slider. Hinge can shoot a little faster, slider's usually a little smoother. But again, that just depends on how you set up your gun. As with most autocockers will shoot the exact same if you know what you're doing, no matter what parts it has on it. I mean, granted, there are some parts that will truly increase the performance of your gun, but most of them, it just comes down to how well you can time your autococker and tune it. Using the smallest Allen key you have right here is the .05 or 0.5, whatever that is. It's the one right below the 1/16. I'm going to take off the trigger shoe. The trigger shoe is not always on slider frames. It's just preference. It just makes it to where you have a wider surface to put your finger instead of just this little piece right here. This little piece, this is the trigger plate. To get that out, what we're going to do is we're going to punch this hole right here. There's a pin right here. We're just going to push that right through. Again, these should come right out, but this gun hasn't been taken apart in a while, so I'm going to take a little bigger Allen key just to be a little more sturdy and just lightly tap it. There we go. You want to try to make sure that it doesn't slip off and scratch the anodizing whenever you're doing that. Most of the time these will just pull right out. You see this one's a little rusty and took a little more effort to get out. So get all this other stuff away. Whenever you do that, that pin is holding your trigger sear. The sear can come right out. The sear is what catches the hammer lug. Set that aside. You also have a sear spring. This is what pushes the sear back up in time for it to catch the hammer lug. Then you're gonna have your trigger plate. You have to slide it back a little bit and then up. You're also gonna have one spring that's behind the trigger plate, and that spring's to push the trigger plate forward to help actuate the three-way. Now, some grip frames have screws. You see this one does. It's got a screw here and a screw here. Those both go vertically into the trigger frame, and it aligns the trigger plate so that you have a nice straight pull, and those help smooth the pull, but not all of them have that. There's not really any need to take those out. You might need to adjust them just a little bit just to get the right height, depending on the height of your trigger plate. But there's no need to take them out right now because it's already been adjusted. Alright. Now to take the timing rod off, you have the timing rod, and the collar, and then the three-way shaft in the three-way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 1/16 Allen key. You have two holes. One of them is here to lock down the threading. This timing rod is threaded into this coupler. That's how you adjust the actuation point of the three-way. The other one, it just goes into the shaft, and that locks the coupler onto the shaft so that it has something to grab onto and pull the shaft so it actuates the three-way. So that's going to come right off, just like you see. I don't know if you can see that or not, but you have the three-way shaft right there. We'll zoom in on that. Alright, what I'm talking about is this little piece right here. Okay? Now you have the coupler and the timing rod. Some vertical ASAs have a slot milled right here. This one doesn't. Some you can actually just pull the whole thing through because the hole's big enough. But again, this one doesn't. It's just again, no really any advantage over one or the other. It's just how companies decided to do it. So that's going to spin right off, and you'll be able to pull your timing rod out. You also have a large O-ring right here. This is the same O-ring that's used for the front blocks. On the vertical ASA, That O-ring just gets sandwiched in between the vertical ASA and the body and seals up the air transfer holes